Good evening, everyone. Thank you. On behalf of the Newark Public Library, welcome. I'm Tom Ankner, the supervising librarian in charge of the library's Charles F. Cummings, New Jersey Information Center. We are excited to host this panel discussion about activism and the Passaic River. This is also the opening of our new exhibit, Revered, Reviled, Restored, Newark's Passaic River. I hope you all get an opportunity to view the exhibit. For those of you who have not yet viewed it, it is on the third floor. It is in the third floor gallery. You can take the elevator or the stairs up one flight to view it. I would just like to take this moment to applaud the work of our two curators, Keegan Fletcher and Beth Zak-Cohen. Please stand up. Keegan and Beth, right over here. Good work. Just a few housekeeping items. We have some food on the tables in the back. Please help yourselves. Bathrooms are out in the gallery and to the right. We ask that everyone hold your questions until the end when the panelists will get to as many as they can. Also be aware that the program tonight is being recorded. Just keep that in mind as you walk around. The camera is right there. And one final item. If anyone parked their car in the deck on Bridge Street, please be aware that it closes at 8 o'clock p.m. That's when the attendant closes the gate and goes home. So if you don't remove your car by 8 o'clock, you won't be able to get to it until the deck reopens tomorrow morning. I'll try to remind people later in the evening. Now on to tonight's program. Now on to tonight's program. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator, a man with a long history of activism around the Passaic River and other issues in Newark. And I'm going to let him check the microphones first. Huh? All set. Thank you. Okay. So Arnold Cohen is a lifelong Newarker, a graduate of Weequahic High School. He began his career in Newark as a grassroots advocate organizing statewide public policy campaigns in the areas of affordable housing, early childhood education, healthcare, and environmental justice. After the discovery of dioxin in the Passaic River, Arnold was a lead organizer with the Ironbound Committee Against Toxic Waste. Currently, Arnold is Senior Policy Advisor at the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. In that position, he has been instrumental in leading campaigns that have led to the passage of laws supporting affordable housing and revitalizing communities. Now, here is Arnold Cohen. Arnold.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, everybody. It's my pleasure and honor to be here on this platform where I've heard so many wonderful presentations over the years at the Newark Public Library. So it's great to be part of that. I want to start by introducing our distinguished panel. Michael Gordon is a Senior Policy Advisor for Department of Environmental Protection. His responsibilities include implementing Passaic River Superfund cleanup and advisor to the Environmental Justice Advisory Council. While working in private practice with Gordon, he served as an environmental attorney to the Ironbound community for over 30 years in a variety of matters, including dioxin contamination, garbage incineration, and hazardous waste cleanup. Next to my left is Lenny Thomas, who is a teacher in Newark schools for over 40 years in math science and computer science. Currently, he is active in a number of community efforts in Ironbound, City of Newark, and the state of New Jersey. Project leader with Spark, Save the Park at Riverbank, Ironbound Super Neighborhood Council, Newark Water Group, Passaic River Community Advisory Group, Newark City Park Advisor, and helping develop curriculum for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. And then to the left of him is Marcy DePina, who's the president of Newark Arts and the executive director of the Riverfront Revival, a nonprofit organization that programs Newark riverfront. Marcy curates and produces a diverse summer calendar of events and is a liaison between the community and the local government as an advocate for parks, for city parks and the Passaic River. She's also an artist, cultural entrepreneur, media personality, and a producer for radio, podcasts, events, film, and television. So you'll be hearing more from all of them. But before I begin talking to our panel, I just want to give you a brief history of how there was a community organization, as Tom alluded to, the Ironbound Community Committee Against Toxic Waste, that was in place when dioxin was first discovered at Diamond Shamrock along the Passaic River in 1983. The Ironbound Committee Against Toxic Waste was formed in 1981 to fight 2 regional incineration proposals for the cleanup of 10 toxic waste sites in the city of Newark. While fighting for the cleanup of dioxin and the river, the committee also successfully defeated proposals for 5 regional incinerators, including the world's largest sewage sludge incinerator and burning the most dangerous toxics at sea off of Port Newark. The ICTW, the Ironbound Committee Against Toxic Waste, forms alliances with similar grassroots groups fighting for the health of their community throughout the state and the country, helping to lead efforts around environmental justice that continue with the Ironbound Community Corporation to this day. So what I'm going to be doing is starting chronologically with Michael, and I'll be asking each of the panelists 2 questions. They have 5 minutes to answer each question, after which we'll be able to have time for the audience to also chime in and ask their questions. So, Michael, give us an overview of the activities that led to the river becoming a super fun site, and tell us about the lawsuits that to clean up the Passaic and get compensation for those damaged by the toxins.
So you basically want me to sum up 40 years of my life's work in 5 minutes.
Got it. Good.
Luckily for you, I would do anything for you. Because Arnold and Nancy changed my life. They changed the city of Newark, and they literally have changed the world with environmental justice. And I'm privileged and proud to call them friends and colleagues. And they've changed my life for the better. I've dedicated 40 years working in the field, in large part because of the opportunity they gave me. They met me in Montclair in 1982. I had just left the Department of Environmental Protection, where I went right out of law school to be trained. And I met them at a public hearing on Montclair Radium. And I said, I just left the DEP, and my brother's a lawyer. He's got an office around the corner. I understand you got a community group in Newark. If you ever need some help, just come on by, call me. The next day I came in late. I was in my overalls, had no secretary, no typewriter, no computer. And there they were sitting in the hallway waiting for me to come in. And boy, did they have problems in the Ironbound. And the first challenge we took on was the McKesson EnviroSystems hazardous waste treatment plant had literally blown up. And the state had this great idea that even though it was in a totally inappropriate location, right adjacent to the Passaic River, in a floodplain, they were going to allow them to rebuild. So having been trained for a few years at DP, I knew that was a winner. And so I won that case for them, and they withdrew that application, and Nancy and Arnold started to say, okay, maybe we've got ourselves a lawyer here. And the next thing that happened was the Thomas Street warehouse next to the Thomas Street School. There was a fire, and when the fire department went in, they found 10,000 leaking drums of hazardous waste. And the department, my former employer, came out and wrote to the landlord and said, this is such a threat that if there's another fire, it could literally blow the grade school off the planet. And we were pretty excited. We thought, okay, department's on this one. And then nothing happened, month after month after month. And on behalf of the Ironbound Committee Against Toxic Waste and at the time, the state had an Office of Public Interest Advocacy where they did environmental work. We teamed up and we got the first court order that made the state spend its own money to immediately remove those hazardous waste drums. And then Nancy and Arnold thought they knew they had a lawyer for life, and they do. And it wasn't too long after that. So here we sit, 2023, I think it's May, literally 40 years ago, Governor Tom Keegan made an announcement. The highest levels of dioxin ever found in soil in the world were found on the abandoned Diamond Shamrock Agent Orange manufacturing site at 80 Lister Avenue. Now I'm going to give you just a brief background of 1983. I hope that sounds like a lot of years ago, but in environmental law terms, that was really the infancy of environmental law. The Superfund law had just passed in 1980. Agent Orange was banned from being manufactured in 1971. That plant site was abandoned in 1969 in anticipation of all the scientific evidence that was being developed that dioxin, an unwanted byproduct when they made Agent Orange, was so toxic, it was called the most toxic substance made by man. So the company knew it and they abandoned the plant. So 1980, Superfund just passed. 1983, February. Again, Tom Keegan, May and June of 1983, 40 years ago, announced the highest levels anywhere in the world. February 1983, just a few months before that, there was an incident in a place called Times Beach, Missouri, where they found dioxin. They bought out the entire town, 800 residents and businesses, because they had 300 parts per billion of dioxin. So when they found such a high level here, what did Governor Keegan do? He offered the ability to relocate the residents who were in the immediate vicinity. He shut the farmers market, never really reopened. It stopped that entire community. And there really was a sense of just the unknown. And the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where I had previously worked, they were not equipped. They were also new in the hazardous waste program. So on behalf of the community, the group Ironbound Committee Against Toxic Waste, we went to court and we convinced the judge that the government was not properly organized, that they weren't communicating with the residents, that they didn't have any kind of strategy, and they really did not articulate what they were trying to evaluate and how they were going to determine how far the contamination had spread, what it was the impact into the residents and into the neighborhood. And the judge ordered the government to produce a comprehensive plan so that the residents can get health screening, that they could be aware of what was going on. So that was the beginning of the activism associated with this whole kind of environmental awareness rising out of all the problems that the Ironbound community had. The next thing that happened was that because we felt that the government was not properly equipped to challenge the chemical company, I co-counseled with the most famous trial lawyer at the time. His name was Melvin Belli in San Francisco, so that we could afford to secure the best scientific experts for the Ironbound community. And that really, I think, from my perspective as a lawyer, kind of started to make it clear that community activism, legal support, and scientific support, when they work together, really can challenge both government and industry so that the community has an effective voice. So that was the lesson that we learned, I think, early on in 1983, 40 years ago. The next year, the state DEP felt that they were ill-equipped to take on the magnitude of the problem that was unfolding from the 80 Lister Avenue operations. As it turned out, Diamond Shamrock, when they made Agent Orange, they were warned about the presence of dioxin in their product by a chemical manufacturer in Germany called Behringer. They told them how to avoid the formation of dioxin, but it would require slowing down the production and re-engineering the plant. They chose not to do it, so they produced some of the highest levels of dioxin in the product, Agent Orange, found anywhere manufactured in America. And all their product went for use in the Vietnam War. And for years and years, every bit of product that was produced was bought by the government to use overseas. 1984, EPA started listing Superfund. We are still in the Superfund site. I stayed through many years as the Ironbound's attorney, and what happened was an investigation throughout the community to find out how far the dioxin spread. They collected dioxin from throughout the neighborhood and they buried it on the site. We had a huge fight because, as Arnold mentioned, one thing they love to do in the Ironbound is build an incinerator and burn things. They don't care if it's from here, as long as they can get here, they want to burn it here. We fought that. And they said, if you don't accept an incinerator to burn all the dioxin waste, we're going to bury it on site because it's too, this was EPA, it's too toxic. There is no licensed disposal facility to take it any place in the world. And think about that. And they buried it right there adjacent to the Passaic River. So right now, the 80 Lister site is kind of a concrete tomb containing the dioxin waste that was brought there. That's called a temporary solution to the problem. They're evaluating whether it's going to be safer to just leave it there and permanently monitor it and control it. They've, over the years, 20 years, they investigated how far up and down the river the dioxin and other types of contamination have traveled. We have a cleanup plan now in place. We have funding beginning to be in place. It's going to be the largest Superfund cleanup in American history. 3.5 million cubic yards of material is going to be removed and processed and disposed of. So stay tuned, because they say in 6 to 8 years, we're going to have 17 miles of the Passaic River cleaned. I plan to be here at that program when we complete that. The companies are being held accountable. Even though I was the Ironbound's attorney and sued for them, then I represented the workers who worked at Diamond Shamrock, the residents in the community, the workers' families. In 2005, I became the lawyer for the state of New Jersey against the Agent Orange companies, and we secured $355 million for the state for reimbursement for economic damage and to cover the public share of any potential costs. So I think I went over 5 minutes for summing up my life, but I just want to conclude by saying one thing. The relationship that we all developed in the Ironbound, me as a lawyer, and I'm part Ironbound because my mom grew up here, swam in the Passaic River. My grandparents had a kosher chicken market on Ferry Street. And so I belong and I'm part of the neighborhood. But because of the work, when I went back in a second career, I retired as a private practicing attorney. I went back to the state in 2016, and I was one of the principal authors of a law, the first in the nation environmental justice law. And it was developed from the knowledge that I learned representing my good friends, Arnold and Nancy. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. You are truly the people's lawyer. So as a segue into that, let me reverse our questions, Lenny. So Lenny Thomas is part of a community advisory group that EPA formed called a CAG to oversee what was going on around the cleanup. So Lenny, why don't you take a couple of minutes to talk about what the CAG is, what you see it doing, what's involvement is in terms of the future of the cleanup of the river.
Okay, good evening, everybody. First thing I want to let you know is I was set up, okay? I moved here, I guess, about 2005, and that's the Ironbound from another part of Newark. And my neighbor said, "You like working with children, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, they're having a meeting at the park. You should go there." I said, "You're going to go? Oh, I'll go later on. You go ahead." So stupidly, I went ahead. She never showed, but I met Nancy. And Nancy was there. She's speaking for Spark. And I found out all about Spark. Spark had been the group that had worked to save the park at Riverbank and had been working hard to keep it up and make it part of the community so the community could enjoy it. And it would be just like the heart and soul of the community, with everybody going back and forth to Riverbank Park. Riverbank Park, in fact, had been very instrumental in, well, the group that worked to save Riverbank Park had been very instrumental in getting more park space put in the Ironbound. And in fact, I was set up again. I had to go get some papers for Spark from Ironbound Community Corporation, and Sister Carol was waiting for me. And she said, "I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay." So we went to the back. I knew I was in trouble. She said, "Do you know what a community advisory group is?" I said, "No." I found out. She said, "I'd like to be part of this group." She said, "You work with the community, and we need people who work with the community." I think what she wanted was, is he going to be crazy enough to come every month for 3 hours to talk about the river cleanup and talk about what we're going to do? She didn't tell me the 3 hours. She just said every month. I said, "I can handle once a month. Okay, I'll go." And that's when I found out. A community advisory group is simply a group of residents, business people, and stakeholders that have an interest in an area. And in this case, it's a group that acts as an advisory group or makes recommendations to the EPA and their partner agencies about a certain project. The project that we were giving input on was the cleanup at Passaic River, probably the largest Superfund site in the United States. And I said, okay, well, this is not bad. Well, it's like going back and taking a graduate course. So if you've done that, you know what I'm talking about. Our meetings every month were not pizza parties. They weren't coffee clutches. They weren't teas. We learned for 3 hours every month. I learned about exclusion zones. I learned about Superfund sites. I learned about type of contamination. We talked about other sites that were across the country, how they got contaminated, how they tried to decontaminate them, all those things that they thought were important. Our motivating factor, though, is probably the fact that since we had a very important resource taken away from us, that is the Passaic River, we were fighting to get it back and maybe getting a little bit more for all the things that we lost in losing the river. When I worked with Spark, I was the environmental teacher, and I used to tell my students about how when people came from Europe for the first time, they looked at a Garden of Eden. There were animals all over the place, flowers all over, but with time it went down. They cut down the trees, they killed off the animals, the flowers were stepped on and gone, and eventually started putting their waste into the river. So whereas the Native Americans who once lived could eat and swim and drink from the river, that was no longer possible. And then it got worse because, as was just mentioned, people start to dump chemical waste into the river. Now, hopefully this is not a group like the group I spoke to before. Guy says, look, don't worry about it because we wash the food good so we can eat it. You can't wash out contamination. And you can't kill it off by drinking alcohol either. So if you think about that, it doesn't work. In fact, it makes it worse. And you can't cook it out. That doesn't help either. We learned, I said, a lot of things about Superfund sites. We saw pictures about how to clean them up. Well, you think all you got to do is you go and take a big shovel, you dig it out, you put it in a truck, you take someplace else and you dump it far away. Didn't work. Then you had to think about what happens if it leaks into the water. Now you're recontaminating everything. So you had to get a special cup to go in and close real tight. So when you pull it out, very little leaked out. You had to find out about how much you could take out. Then one person brought in this big vacuum cleaner type of thing. It was about that thick, and it would just suck up the mud from the bottom of the river. And then it would truck it about 3 miles away, actually, and take it to a place where it would be dried out. Well, we sort of used something like that when we took out the contamination at the Lister site. Now, I don't know how many people know about the Lister site, but that was the old Diamond Shamrock site. That's where they made dioxin or Agent Orange. And what would happen is, as part of the process, you'd have all this snow-looking chemical produced and would pile up. They would put it onto the dock, and they would tell the guys to go out there and shovel it into the river like snow, except it didn't melt and it didn't dissolve. But what would happen is it would get into the water and the water would flush it. Now, the Passaic River, for those who don't know, is a tidal river. So the water goes one way and it comes back the other way. It's going up, it's going down, up and down. And that pollution is being swept up the river, it's being brought back down the river. But every time it goes a little bit further one way, a little bit further the other way. Some of it will actually end up going out to the ocean, and some ends up on the shore, in the mud, in the animals that live there. So if you want to die in about 7 years, eat the crabs. I'm told they taste good. Eat the fish, same deal. And it's free, but everything's free is not good. Well, with the classes that we took, we found out about all these things. I think I could just about get a job now working in an exclusion zone. I know you have to change your clothes and put other type of clothing on top. You don't have to worry about wearing a mask because the air is not the problem, though the air is not always good. But the problem is the soil and the water. And it's important to mention soil and water because there are two different types of pollution. The one in the water and a different one in the soil. Now, I mention that because we had a cleanup already. We took out that major, like actually 80% of the dioxin came out from the Diamond Shamrock site. They made a box, they emptied the water out of that box, and they dug down about 12 feet and took all that mud out. Not a small operation, but it only took out 80%. Now, you say, well, 80% is good. So no, I like to use this example. Take a big bag of flour, drop it on the floor. It's easy, you can sweep it up, right, or vacuum it. But don't vacuum it up right away. Let it stay there for a week or two. Now when you go back, that same bag of flour that was so easy to clean up has spread outside, it's in your clothes, it's on the wall, it's gone out the window, it's every place. And this is the problem that we faced. So we had to look at solutions to get it all back up. One of the things that Sister Carol mentioned, and then I always have her voice sort of echoing in my ear, which is not a bad thing. She said, when we clean this up, we can't take it and dump it in somebody else's backyard. And actually, I felt sort of embarrassed because I'm part Native American, and what they did with one of the last batches was they took it and they dumped it onto a reservation where it got into the water, leaked out, and made people sick. So I always remember her words. So now we had that choice. Either it had to be incinerated which means some of it gets in the air and it's not gone. That's another problem. Or we could dehydrate it, pack it under railroad cars, cover it up, and take it someplace else to be dumped. So part of the solution, one of the later solutions they picked up was take it out to a desert, put it into a cave where water was not an issue, and bury it there. So you have these huge cakes about so big of dehydrated mud being shipped out by railroad car to be buried in the cave. The next thing would probably do the same thing unless they switch over to have some sort of burning done, where they burn it to the point where it's not gone, but it just changes chemically, so it no longer is as toxic as it was in the very beginning. All these are part of the choices that we had to look at as part of the CAG. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting is this. The people who came to the CAG meeting were about as alike as the people here. In fact, you probably are more alike than the people that we had in our group. I had people there I didn't like, I'll be honest. But the way things were set up, we learned to respect one another. We actually came up with some values that we decided on. I'm not going to go through the whole list, okay? That would take the whole book, but just some of them. We wanted protection of the public health. When we cleaned up, we did not want to make everybody sick because you're digging up stuff in the bottom of the river. Not a good idea. We want environmental protections and restoration of the river. So it's not just make it look good. We did want that, but you wanted it so it would be healthier. We wanted to have fish. We might be able to swim. Viable nature resource is what we were looking for. We were looking for economic benefits so that people could use the river and have businesses there, make money with the river, which sounds far-fetched. But these are some of the things that we were looking for. As I said, it was a really diverse group. Community benefits, so the people there would be able to use the river. I saw as part of my job to go out and talk to people in the neighborhood since I'm a resident. I was complaining at one point when they were talking about building the park along the edge of the river. And I said, you know, you're going to have a dock there. That's dangerous. Kids will go there, they'll fall in the water. You must have a big fence with a good lock so they can't get into the water, because they get in the water, they will drown. Water's deep, by the way. It's like 35, 40 feet where I live. So I could hide my whole house in the river and nothing would be showing. Somebody said, don't worry about it. Now I'm annoyed. He said, don't worry. What do you mean, don't worry about it? Well, I found out later on talking to more of the neighbors that it was not an issue. For decades, parents have been telling their kids, don't go over there. That's a sewer. A sewer. That's a sewer. And even now, you probably find out with some of the programs we have, it's difficult to get people who live in the neighborhood to come to the park because their parents have told them that's a sewer. You don't play in the sewer. This actually became one of the things that the CAG did, getting people back in contact with the river. We wanted to make sure they knew it was becoming more available.
Lenny, could you just kind of wrap? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Well, there were some other things that were really involved with that. I just lost one of them there. But the CAG was able to do this by getting community involved with what was going on. Instead of having people from outside coming in to do the work there, we set up a program whereby we vetted people in the neighborhood to get the jobs that were there because they were good jobs. They paid well. And we had a lot of people there who were looking for work. And so we insisted that when they did the cleanup, they got local vendors, they employed local people, and they trained them so they could do this work. It worked because we got all the people that we vetted, plus one got hired. And at the end, when that job was over, they invited them all to continue working with them. So it was a good job there. I get to pass this on later on if you have more questions. I'll just mention this. There's a website called ourpassaic.org, ourpassaic.org. If you're in for dates and a lot of other data, you can find it there. I'm not great with dates. I'm terrible, but it's there so you can look them up. And you see some of the things that were accomplished by the GAG. We're still meeting. We're not meeting exactly every month, and it's a little bit shorter, but we still have some of the same goals, trying to get the community involved in making decisions about something that's going to affect us. Now, one of the problems I see is this. I know I will not be alive when we accomplish this. The cleanup's going to take about 10 years. This initial cleanup, that's for the dirt. The water will have to flush clean, and that will take anywhere from 25 to 70 years. There's no way to really predict that. So it's going to be an ongoing process. Most of us understand that, and we're looking to have something our grandchildren will be able to really enjoy. With that, I'll pass the baton.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to Marcy, who can talk about the park that we have now on the river, which was part of the efforts of some people in the room with Trust for Public Land. I saw Damon Rich here. That then helped create this park that people can enjoy, not our grandchildren, but today, this summer. So Marcy, tell us about what led to this beautiful gem that we have along the river and some of the things people can look forward to this summer.
Well, I certainly don't have nearly as much skin in the game as everybody who's on this panel with me, and certainly folks that are here in the audience. And I came to this work rather late. I got to do the fun stuff. So after all the hard work was done, I got to come in and do the fun stuff. But the work does still continue. And as we just heard, the Passaic still needs to be cleaned. So the work continues. So picking up sort of where we left off, after many decades of fighting on behalf of the community, Ironbound Community Corporation, Nancy, Arnold, everybody, Damon got involved as our city planner. And that fight really was around not only cleaning up the Passaic, but there became another fight that was involved in this. And that was, of course, the possibility of Riverbank Park being destroyed, which it is a historic Olmsted Park, and that park was going to be made into the Newark Bears Stadium. And we already are dealing with a lack of public space in the Ironbound, and certainly a great need for that space. And the community really galvanized and said, no, we're not going to accept this. You have to find another site. There's no reason why our historic park should be destroyed for this, minor league baseball team. And it was a big fight. And it was the culmination of decades of fighting already for the Passaic to be cleaned up. So I wasn't involved in that fight, but I'm sure it felt like, insult to injury after fighting for so many decades for the recognition of what had happened along the Passaic and the decades of abuse that people that live not only in the Ironbound, but in the South Ward and certainly throughout the entire city had to deal with as the result of the Diamond Shamrock Company and all of the pollution that was caused by the dioxin, in addition to the other pollution that people had to deal with living in the Ironbound, least of which is not the truck emissions that people have to deal with in the area. So, that fight was gladly won. And as a result of it, it was almost not won. And the state has a law that says that for every park space that is taken away, you have to replace it. So there were plans in place for the park to be destroyed and be made into the Newark Bears Stadium. And so the idea that Riverfront Park would be built was already there, but in a great, I feel like it's one of the most powerful stories of people power in our entire city. The community won, and it wasn't really, some giant that came in, although Joe DiVincenzo did play a role in it. but really, having the people just like all of us that marched, that, created ribbons, that got out knocked on doors and put up pamphlets and really just galvanized people to say, no, and no, we're not going to put up with this. And you have to listen to us. And so in the end, we ended up with 2 parks. Riverbank Park was saved. And thank God, because we all know what happened to Newark Bears Stadium, right? That would have been a complete waste. And we got Riverfront Park, and, massive win. On a personal note, I happen to live right next to the river. In fact, I don't live in the same apartment anymore, but I used to be able to look out of my back window and see Lenny's apartment from the other side. So neighbors, and the park was right there. And I had no idea. And I consider myself to be a pretty well-educated, informed, engaged person. I used to take my son for walks. We used to think it was like the wild, wild west. We'd go down to the river and it was like, it was like completely wild down there, and we'd explore, and, you never know who you might find hiding in the river. And, it was very adventurous. I had no idea about the Superfund site, none. I didn't know at all. And I really didn't come into this work as anybody who'd worked in, the realm of environmental justice, certainly always an advocate for social justice, but I didn't know a lot about what had happened in my own neighborhood. And so one day I was at the Quick Check, which is what was on Raymond Boulevard, and there was a woman there sitting down at a table, and she had piles of paper. And this was like the 2nd or 3rd time that I've seen this woman at Quick Check. And finally I just said to her, like, what are you doing? And she said, oh, I am now on my 3rd bout of cancer. And I believe that it really has something to do with what's happened on the Passaic. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so she began to tell me the story. And it was an understatement even for me to say, I was shocked. I mean, I was like blown back. And my first thought was, oh my God, I've been walking on this river with my son, who's like 4, and I've been exposing myself to we would go down and we would like touch the river's edge, the sediment, all these things. I mean, you can imagine the horror that I felt in that moment, knowing that right under my nose, right in my own community, this horrific chemical accident, this horrific, gross neglect on behalf of a company that probably has more money than God had taken place. And we were all exposed to their neglect, to their abuse, without even knowing it. And as I said, I thought I was educated and informed. And in that moment, I realized, well, if I don't know about this, who else doesn't know about this? And then I looked out my back window and I saw all the people in my neighborhood who had moved here from different countries and brought their gardening traditions with them and were growing grapes in their backyard and had gardens in their backyard. And I felt like Erin Brockovich. I wanted to run outside and scream at the top of my lungs, let's get down. But of course, I didn't do that. And, when the opportunity came up, a good friend of mine said, I know you're really interested in this river story and you're really passionate about it. And I wanted to make a film about it initially. He said, I think I may have found a way for you to make a contribution, to help tell the story, to be a part of the change, and that will really make you feel good about it. And that opportunity was to be the program director for Newark Riverfront Revival. And, up until that point, I had primarily worked in New York City, even though I had lived in Newark most of my life. I worked in, the fun industry of entertainment. I got to do all this fun stuff. But I really just felt like it was time for me to make a contribution to the great city that I lived in, to give back to the city that had given me so much, and to help to create a better world for people like my son, for us, for all of us. And so when this opportunity came up, I had to go for it. So that was in 2014, I believe. And truth be told, I was just recovering from cancer. In fact, I had gone to the interview with a scarf around my neck and a very quiet voice, and nobody knew what was going on. That I had 2 weeks before just had surgery and had my thyroid removed. And I couldn't stop thinking about that woman and her 3rd bout of cancer, and how many other people in my community were just like me, that were suffering from illnesses that were directly related to the contamination that we live around us at every turn. And so here we are today, 2000, that was in 2014. It's been almost 9 years. The park was opened in 2012. So it's been now 11 years since the park was open. That work that was done, really, I have to give the credit to all the folks that are here sitting beside me, to Nancy Zak, to Damon Rich, to Scott Dvorak from Trust for Public Lands, and really to the community for showing up and saying, no, this river does belong to us. This space does belong to us. This is our community. And, when I first took on that role, I wasn't quite sure what it would entail. I didn't know if I was suddenly gonna, turn into this environmental, like, could I blend sort of my care and concern for social and economic and environmental justice and the arts, and can we do all of that? And what I found was that a lot of people didn't know this story, but one really great way to get people to know was to draw them in with programs. So it's been a mission. It was a mission of Newark Riverfront Revival before I ever got there, that started with boat tours before the park was even there. And those boat tours were drawing people in with cool programs. Hey, get on the river, come and see what's down, on our river, what's happening here. People would go down to the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission and go on their boat dock there, and they would learn all about the Passaic River. They would learn about the contamination, but they would also learn about what was being done. Because while it is a tragedy, there's also triumph, and the triumph is in people power and our ability to actually affect change. And it's an incredible, incredible example for our young people, especially in a world that we live in today where people feel so powerless. They feel like there's so many huge things going on and there's nothing that they can do to change it. And this story, the story of the Passaic, the story of Riverfront Park, shows how we can actually do it. So those first programs, bringing people on boat tours with Hackensack Riverkeeper and Captain Bill Sheehan and Captain Hugh Corolla, really started to teach people about what had happened and what they could do about it. And at first it was just simply telling a neighbor, telling a friend. And then from there, that turned into Riverfront Park. And the tireless efforts of all of these people started to pay off. So that first step, or second step actually, of cleaning up the Passaic began when what is now Riverfront Park was remediated, and clean fill replaced the contaminated soil. And we now had access for the very first time in decades to our river. We had more green space. We had a larger tree canopy in our neighborhood, and people started to feel a sense of hope. And they started to understand that there actually is a lot of beauty in our neighborhood. It might not necessarily always look good, and people do say, oh, the river smells and so on and so forth, but they started to dream of and see of and reimagine what that looked like. And that really was the people who did that. The process of Riverfront Park deeply involved the people. Participatory design was used. There were many public meetings that were held. Children made drawings. They sat there and they drew what it might look like and what it might look like in 30 years from now. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to give people time to ask questions. But
Sure.
Can you just give 2 quick teasers about what people can look forward to this summer?
Oh, sure. Well, programs is what we do. Boat tours still are the cornerstone of our program. We have about 8 dates of boat tours that take place along the river. We have a bunch of other health and wellness. We have capoeira, we have yoga, we have a fit club that's part of our fitness zone. We also have River Day, which is happening on June 3rd. It's our season opener. It features a bunch of our Ironbound Community Corporation and Spark and educational tables, as well as performances, a little bit of fitness. And then we have house music, which always brings out a bunch of people.
So how can people learn about it?
So
Website?
everything that happens at the river is at newarkcityparks.org, and feel free to come on down, but we'll always hit you with the hard information once you get there. We bring you in with the fun, and then we hit you with the information. Thanks.
So we want to leave some time for questions from the audience. So does anybody have any questions?
Thank you guys for all the work that you've done in enhancing my community, our community. I don't know why I'm getting emotional, but I really appreciate your work and what you've done. I had two questions. Why did the companies like Diamond Shamrock and the government not have a plan for the leak of dioxin? Was it ignorance and poor planning, or did they not care? I'm sorry?
MONEY.
Yes.
Money, money, money.
Can you be a little more specific?
They were told they were doing it wrong. They knew they were doing it wrong. They continued to do it wrong without regard for the consequences. They were an intentional polluter. They were found to be an intentional polluter. They're the worst of the worst. They had disregard for the resources, for the people who worked there, for the people who lived in the community.
Absolutely. So it's just, we're getting paid to do it, so we're just gonna do the job and the hell with everyone else.
It was a printing press because every piece of material they could produce was being bought at an exorbitant price by the government to be used in Vietnam to defoliate the trees over in the war zone.
And there are generations of people that have been deformed and children deformed, and people died as a result of that in Vietnam. So let's not forget what happened to the people there.
Yeah, the veterans and the Vietnamese people have sued the companies. Everybody, lawsuits are imperfect. There's never satisfaction. I mean, there's settlements. So that operation impacted the residents in the area, the businesses in the area, the workers' families, the veterans, the people who bought their products because they were so contaminated. The Vietnamese people, they really left a legacy. And if it was unknowing, it would be one thing, but they were warned in 1957 and they continued to manufacture for another 12 years with the knowledge that they were producing the dirtiest Agent Orange product produced anywhere.
I would say, and they're still trying to outweight the people who would sue them, because a lot of them are going to die from cancer. So if they wait long enough, they can't sue.
I mean, the litigation is studied and taught about because the company divided itself up, sold some of the assets. It ended up in Occidental Chemical Corporation. They didn't operate the plant, but they have the liability for it. Bad purchase on their part because they were going to be indemnified by the company that operated there. That company no longer exists. Parts of it ended up with the Argentinian oil company, National Oil Company. The other piece ended up in a Spanish oil company, Repsol. It's been going on, the litigation has been going on and continues to go on for 40 years. So it's really legally one of the most troubling and fascinating cases, as well as environmentally, as Lenny said, when you see a tidally flowed river with this kind of historic contamination with the most toxic compound known to man, it just is a problem that's taken years to evaluate. I mean, many of us in the state, we were looking for a full cleanup, which would have been 3 times the size, which was just beyond the comprehension of anybody to ask for, because EPA has very specific rules. And one of the rules that EPA operates under is it cost effective. And they said that they could get a protective remedy for this scale back. And when you talk about it being scaled back at 3.5 million cubic yards of sediment being removed, there's a lot of contamination out there.
And then I know that was a double question, but I do have another question here. Are there any records, or have any of you collected data of adverse health effects on people in the Ironbound community?
Well, so I represented the workers, and the workers were studied, and the workers died very young. It was a magnet to work at that plant from the families from Western Pennsylvania came out of the coal mines, and they thought because they were above ground that they were getting a much better deal, but they were being systemically poisoned, and a lot of them died early in their 40s from chemical poisoning. There were a few cases of marker disease called soft tissue cell sarcoma there. So the workers really took the brunt. In the early days, there were no showers, so they took dioxin home to the families, and their families were exposed. There's a lot of studies about the potential health impacts. The Vietnam veterans have, after a long battle, gotten a number of cancers, diabetes, heart disease related to exposure to Agent Orange. So they get compensation for that.
If I could just jump in with one thing, most of us are keyed into something that smells bad, looks bad, tastes bad. So if it doesn't hit any one of those markers, it has to be all right. With dioxin is completely not true. I could give you a dioxin soda right now and you drink and say, tastes good. But if you keep drinking it, it's going to get you. And that's part of the problem. We smell something, say, oh, this is poison. No, that's not what's going to kill you. You may not like the smell, but all this other stuff is lethal. And that's where some of the problem is.
I'm just gonna say, my father served in Korea during the Vietnam War, and he put in a claim to the VA for exposure to Agent Orange, and the government kept challenging the case for 6 years, 6 or 7 years until my father died. And then after my father died, my mother was still pursuing the case. 7 years later, they finally granted my mother the money for my father being exposed to Agent Orange. She had to qualify the various diseases that my father had. My father and a lot of my family, my uncles and my aunts are alcoholics. And my uncle, he died of a heart attack. He didn't go to Korea or Vietnam. And my aunt, who was an alcoholic and ate very poorly, she had a heart attack, but she didn't have diabetes. My father had diabetes. He had several strokes. He had other bodily conditions. So even though his siblings, who didn't live really good lives, had one condition, he had almost 6 conditions. But the government tried to wait him out until he died. They succeeded, but my mother was able to get money for that. And obviously, he was exposed to this before me and my sister were born, but we don't know the ramifications of that. So I just wanted to tell you that as a real life example. And then just to follow up, and I haven't seen Beth's exhibition yet, but I look forward to seeing it. One of the things with the Passaic River is that it has a long, and I'm sure they explored this on the panel, a long history of abuse from the factories and the various going on for more than 100 years, even before that. So it's always been a site of neglect and abuse, basically, since the mid 1800s, so that was it.
Well, this isn't a question. I just wanted to mention that when we were marching for the cleanup of the dioxin, we often had the veterans groups come with us and march with us because we all had the same issue of the horrible health effects. And that leads into the commercial for tomorrow night's event at the Riverfront Park. The Veterans for Peace are bringing the Golden Rule Boat. The crew from the Golden Rule Boat is coming And they are talking about things that everybody needs. The golden rule is you give people what you want back. And the things we all need are peace, clean air, and clean water. You know, those would be good places to start. So that's at 6 o'clock at Riverfront Park tomorrow night.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. I am Liza Gross and a resident of the Ironbound. Thank you for everything you're doing. I am also a rower, and in line with what Arnold has been asking, what is possible in the river now, I just want to say, if you've been to the exhibit or when you go to the exhibit, you see that Newark was a hotbed of rowing. There were clubs all over the place. Nothing was left. And right now there is a resurgence of rowing. Newark Boat Club, which is the one I row out of in Rutherford, was founded in 1868 and it's still going strong. We have the Passaic River Rowing Association a little bit further down. Few boats come as far down as Newark now, but in the works, we have a project that will bring Brick City rowing here to the city. So in a few years, we will be able to celebrate National Learn to Row Day here in Newark. I am very hopeful of that. In the meantime, June 3rd, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a conflict. June 3rd is National Learn to Row Day, and you will see up and down the river a lot of boats. I welcome you at Newark Boat Club in Rutherford if you want to just look, or you'll be able to get in a boat if you want and row up and around the river with people that know how to row the boat. So you don't need to be afraid that you're going to fall. If not, just watching the boats on the river is a wonderful thing. And it's part of what Arnold was saying, you know, what is possible now, and it's continuing to be possible thanks to, you know, the wonderful work. Thank you.
And we do have kayaking on the river as well. We didn't have it last year because Hackensack Riverkeeper has, they're looking for a new program manager for their rowing program. But we have had pretty much my entire time in being the executive director. We do give people access to the river on a monthly basis. And Brick City Rowing Club is certainly teaching young people how to row. They have a very robust program that was born out of St. Benedict's. And they're all, not only are they teaching people how to row, they're also helping young people to find pathways to higher education through rowing. Because as you know, in a city that is underserved, our students don't have as many opportunities, financial opportunities for higher education. This is a great pathway for people to get scholarships to attend college.
Thank you guys so much on the panel for really just sharing your experience with activism and organizing for us. My name is Kamika. I work at Flint Hill Community Action in the South Ward. And one thing that you said, Marcy, that really stuck out to me was kind of making that connection between what's happening in the Ironbound and how that's flowing towards the rest of Newark, and it's going into the South Ward. I think oftentimes, you know, we have to fight against working in silos. My organization is like the baby of theirs in some ways. So I really think that doing like a cross-ward fight back is so key, making sure that we are not just staying within those boundaries. On a related note, I grew up in Passaic, New Jersey, and you know, my friends and I, when we were walking to the high school, would make jokes about how there are dead bodies in the Passaic River. And so I think this question of like making sure that we are building across these cities, across these counties, across these, you know, political boundaries from one ward to the next is really important, because very similar to a point Noel made, these, you know, rivers are the site of, you know, historical industrial buildup, but that's the thing, rivers flow everywhere, right? And so it's very important that we are coordinating across these, you know, lines that we're engineering, and coming together around that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for your comment because what you're saying is so true. I mean, anybody who lives in Newark, we know that there has historically been a divide between the ironbound and the rest of the city, right? Literally bound by iron. And a lot of people have not felt welcome in the ironbound. And so the programming that takes place has been very intentional. I have to, again, give it up to Damon for having the vision to bring house music to the river because that changed things. It suddenly made people who lived on the other side of the tracks feel very welcome, and it spread the story of what was happening citywide. Riverfront Park is not an ironbound park. It's a city of Newark park. It belongs to the whole city. It's a state of New Jersey park. It's an American park. It belongs to everybody. This is our land. And we have to, the only way for the changes to really be made is for us to continue to keep the pressure on. And if people don't know about the story, it very easily could be forgotten. So it's an imperative that we continue to do this work and expose this story to as many people as possible. And that's why programs are so important because people come out for the fun.
Okay, I have 3 questions to ask the panel. Number one, what was the address of that company that produced Agent Orange? What was the address?
80 Lister Avenue.
Okay, because I've been asked that. I was informed about 10 years ago by a telephone technician that they produced Agent Orange in the ironbound section. And every time I mentioned it to someone, everyone would ask me, where was it? Where was it? And so is the building still there or anything still there?
No, the building's been demolished and now it's basically capped over. And if you go there, it looks just kind of like an open field.
It's like a cemetery.
So I call a monument to man's stupidity is what's there.
Okay. Yeah. All right, then the next question is, did it affect internally get to Raymond Boulevard? Did any of the pollutant?
The dust spread throughout the community. It wasn't just that location. People awoke one day to find guys in white spacesuits with big vacuum cleaner trucks vacuuming up the street because the dust had blown. As I said, it's not water soluble, but it's light enough to be blown by the wind. So it just spread throughout the neighborhood. Plus, there were a couple other sites in the Ironbound where Agent Orange was actually being stored. And so they had concentrations there too.
Now, did it affect the water flowing to any of the places? You know, we had the largest beer brewery in the world, Valentine Beer, in the Ironbound
Yeah,
section.
that's a gradient that the Agent Orange wouldn't have made it there. So the investigation of the neighborhood was 40 years ago, right? In 1983, they went out, they started taking samples and they found it off site. There was a scrap yard. There was railroad tracks where material was shipped. So they tracked it down. They dug up a lot of ground. They cemented over a lot of grass. Over a period of a few years, they tried to get it, but there were lower levels. Right at the manufacturing site was the highest levels, as I had mentioned, ever found anywhere, but that was literally under a tank. So it did spread off site. They took years to investigate it. Whatever they found that was contaminated with dioxin, they brought down back to the 80 Lister site and they buried it.
So it didn't get into the water line of the manufacturer, because my father worked for you ever hear Royal Crown Soda? Knee High, Hires Root Beer?
Yeah.
Their plant was on Raymond Boulevard. And my father died of cancer. He had in 1971? No, it's 1970, 71. My father died of cancer. So that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, no, it's a good
I'm being
question. I
educated.
mean,
This is incredible.
there was an explosion at the plant in 1960. The plant blew up, and I'm sure it showered dioxin throughout the neighborhood. So in those years, the Ironbound had many operating plants that were putting out a lot of material. The Agent Orange was primarily bad batches were just dumped directly into the river. There were air emissions going on. There was that explosion in 1960. Yeah, I know.
It's not gonna be there. No. You can breathe it in.
Can somebody describe a little bit what's involved with monitoring to make sure that what's buried doesn't leak?
Yeah, so they have a network of wells that surround the site that are monitored, and they take water level measurements and chemical measurements. Remember, it's basically flowing into the river, but they are collecting the material and treating it. But the river still is contaminated, as Lenny was saying, even though they did a focus kind of removal. We still have 8 to 10 years before that section of the river is really cleaned. So they do monitor it. The question is that Lenny and the CAG are dealing with EPA and our agency is dealing with is, are we going to call this a permanent remedy and make sure that it's properly monitored and keep it in place? Or are we going to open it up and try and take it somewhere? Or, as Lenny was saying, they're basically talking about new innovative treatments, so it continues. It's a problem for the community forever.
If I just jump in one more thing. Yes, the site, the Diamond Shamrock site itself has been encapsulated, but water does go underneath there, and that's the water that's being monitored. But we still have the river. We have 20% of the oxygen still in the river, and that is yet to be cleaned up. Plus, there are other contaminants. That's why I said water and mud. So we're going to basically clean the mud, and we're going to get it down to a small percentage of exposure. There'll still be some left, and we just have to make sure we don't make new centers, new hotspots. And that's what we're trying to focus on now. Diamond Shamrock, as Christ is kept, was not the only hotspot that we had. We actually cleaned up the site upriver, but 80% of it was right there. So we have some other sites that we're watching, we're monitoring, they're taking measurements and so forth, but it wasn't the only site.
But you actually gave the best advice, which is do not eat a crab or a fish from that area. I mean, it is literally some of the most toxic numbers the EPA has ever seen on the health impacts from blue crabs in that area. And I'm not sure if people are, but if you see anybody, just try and tell them not to do that.
They are.
But they taste good though. I'm told by some people who live there by the river that the fish and the crabs taste great, but they don't eat them. I'm confused about that, but anyway, no, I have seen people over there doing that because it's free. And when people get free stuff, you get what you pay for. So I just say it as a warning. And I know Marcia said it already. Before we run out of other time, I invite everybody here to come by and visit. It's free. That part you don't have to worry about. But come by and see our park, see the river. Even as it is contaminated, don't drink the water. I'd be careful about walking into it and things like that. But it's still a great place to go see. And if you've seen the American River, you can see why, but it's a great place to go see. So I charge everybody, don't just listen to us. Find out for yourself. Find out what a great place it is.
Thank you, panel.
Thank you.